The secret history of the final 24 hours of the Third Reich begins with a fundamental and terrifying physical contrast. Above ground, in the final days of April 1945, Berlin was an apocalyptic landscape. The Red Army, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, was engaged in savage street-by-street combat, rain of artillery fire leveling the last remaining symbols of German power. But 12 meters beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, inside the Führerbunker, a different psychological reality was being constructed. This concrete tomb, reinforced with a 4-meter-thick ceiling, was not just a shelter from Soviet shells. It was a sanctuary for a dying ideology, a place where the logic of military defeat was systematically forbidden. Inside the upper and lower bunkers, the air was heavy with the smell of stale concrete, diesel fumes from the overworked generators, and the cheap perfume of the female staff. The secret tension among the high-ranking officers and secretaries was palpable. They knew the end was measured in hours, not days. Yet, the official narrative, dictated by Adolf Hitler, remained absolute. Berlin would not fall. General Helmuth Weidling, the commander of Berlin's defense, would arrive for briefings, exhaustion written on his face, reporting the collapse of the front lines, only to be met with Hitler's demands for counterattacks by non-existent armies. This was the theater of the absurd that defined the bunker. Maps covered in flags representing phantom divisions, while the actual bleeding Wehrmacht was being pushed back meters overhead. The secret atmosphere of decadence and doom was cemented by the strange events of April 20. Eva Braun, Hitler's long-term companion, who had arrived from Munich against his wishes, finalized her plans for their wedding, while Soviet soldiers fought their way toward the nearby Potsdamer Platz. A low-level municipal official named Walter Wagner was drafted from his Volkssturm unit to perform the ceremony. The secret reality of this wedding was that it was a funeral ritual in disguise. The attendees, including Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann, wore civilian clothes or dress uniforms that felt absurdly out of place. After the brief ceremony, a small, somber reception was held, featuring a bottle of champagne and the last remaining cake. While the participants discussed the most effective methods of suicide, the secret of this final day was the complete severance of the command chain from reality. The orders emanating from the bunker were based on maps and intelligence that was 12 or 24 hours old, a fatal delay when Soviet tanks were advancing every hour. Hitler, consumed by a paranoid belief in his own military intuition and increasingly erratic due to illness and stress, viewed every tactical retreat as treason. The professional soldiers in the bunker were paralyzed, caught between their professional obligation to save their remaining troops and their legal oath of personal loyalty to a man who would rather see the entire German nation perish in Ajitardmiren than admit defeat. The bunker had become a concrete cocoon of pure illusion, waiting for the final, violent breach of truth. As the morning of April 30th, 1945 dawned, the secret bubble of denial inside the Führerbunker began to The physical world was literally collapsing into the concrete structure. Soviet artillery shells were now landing so close that dust from the bunker's ceiling was falling onto the maps. The secret turning point for Adolf Hitler's personal decision-making was not just the military reports from General Weidling, but a piece of intelligence that arrived via radio: the execution of Benito Mussolini. The news that the Italian Duce had been shot, kicked, and hung upside down in a Milanese square by partisans sent a wave of visceral terror through the bunker. It was the catalyst that shifted Hitler's focus from a phantom counterattack to the meticulous logistics of his own disappearance. The secret preparation for the final act was conducted with a cold, German, technical precision. Hitler summoned his personal physician, Dr. Werner Asse, not to discuss a cure, but to verify the efficacy of his cyanide capsules, to ensure the poison was not a fake provided by the SS Hitler, now deeply distrusted after Himmler's secret attempts. Negotiate with the Allies. The capsules were tested on Blondie, Hitler's beloved German shepherd. The secret horror of this moment, witnessed by the bunker's staff, was the clinical nature of the act. The dog was poisoned in the bunker's latrine area, and its death confirmed the lethal potency of the potassium cyanide. This was the moment the great illusion was replaced by the great finality. While this laboratory of death operated below, the contrast on the streets of Berlin was reaching its peak. General Weidling arrived for his final briefing, his uniform caked in the dust of the city's ruins. He reported that the Soviet forces were now less than 500 meters from the Reich chancellery. The secret irony was that while Weidling was begging for permission to lead a breakout of the remaining soldiers and civilians to avoid a massacre, Hitler was preoccupied with the technical details of his cremation. He ordered his adjutant, Otto Gunsch, to secure 200 liters of gasoline, a precious commodity that was nearly impossible to find in a city with zero fuel reserves. The secret mission to scavenge gasoline from destroyed vehicles in the Chancellery garage was carried out under heavy Soviet shell fire, highlighting the absurdity of the Reich's final priority: fuel for a funeral pyre, but not for its tanks. Inside the private quarters, the atmosphere was one of macabre formalism. Eva Hitler, as she was now called, spent her final hours carefully selecting her outfit for the suicide. The secret psychological reality was a bizarre return to normalcy. Secretaries continued to type, the kitchen staff prepared a final vegetarian meal of spaghetti and cabbage, and the sound of clinking glasses from the officers' canteen continued. The bunker had bifurcated into two worlds: the private suite, where death was being choreographed, and the corridors where the staff, sensing the end of the oaths of loyalty, began to drink heavily and smoke openly, defying the strict prohibitions Hitler had maintained for years. The secret of the final 24 hours was that the principal had dissolved into a desperate individual search for an exit, whether through a bullet or a bottle of schnapps. At approximately 15:30 hours on April 30th, 1945, the secret tension inside the lower Führerbunker reached a state of total atmospheric pressure. The lunch's spaghetti with a light tomato sauce had been consumed in a strained, artificial silence. Adolf Hitler, a man who had spent the last 12 years dictating the fate of millions with his voice, now retreated into his private study with Eva Braun for the final, silent act. Outside the heavy steel door, the secret death watch began. Loyal adjutants, including Otto Gunsch and Heinz Lynch, stood in the corridor, their hands on their holsters, breathing in the thick, recirculated air of the ventilation system. The contrast was staggering. While the most powerful man in Europe prepared to pull a trigger, Soviet soldiers were engaged in a murderous hand-to-hand struggle for the Reichstag building, only 900 meters away. The secret logistics of the suicide were a combination of chemical and ballistic force. Per Hitler's explicit instructions, they were to leave, no doubt. Eva Braun chose the passive path of the cyanide capsule, a quick respiratory failure. Hitler, distrusting the poison alone, combined it with a Walther PPK 7.65mm pistol. The secret moment of impact was marked by a single, muffled crack that many in the bunker claimed not to have heard over the roar of the overhead diesel generators and the thud of Soviet Katyusha rockets. When Lynch finally opened the door, the secret of the Reich's end was revealed in a tableau of blood and velvet. Hitler sat slumped on the sofa, a bullet wound in his right temple, while Eva Braun lay curled beside him, the faint scent of bitter almonds, a hallmark of cyanide, clinging to her body. The secret aftermath was a frantic, macabre race against the advancing Red Army. As the bodies were wrapped in grey army blankets and carried up the narrow emergency stairs into the Chancellery garden, the gasoline quest of the previous hours became the final mission. In the middle of a Soviet artillery barrage, Gunsch and Lynch doused the corpses in the 200 liters of fuel. The secret cremation was a jagged, horrific scene. Under a dark sky choked with the smoke of a burning Berlin, the flames struggled to consume the remains of the dictator. The officers stood at the bunker's entrance, giving one last Nazi salute as shells whistled overhead, a final, hollow gesture of a regime that had already ceased to exist everywhere but in their own minds. However, the most chilling secret of this final day was unfolding in the upper bunker: the fate of the Goebbels children. Magda Goebbels, the First Lady of the Reich, had decided that her 6 children should not grow up in a world without National Socialism. While the officers were disposing of Hitler's body, Magda was meticulously preparing her children for sleep. The secret horror of this act was its domesticity. She gave them hot chocolate, laced with morphine, before crushing cyanide capsules in their mouths. This was the ultimate logistics of delusion, a mother's fanatical belief that death was a kinder fate than a life under Allied occupation. As the children lay in their white nightgowns, the secret moral collapse of the Nazi elite was complete. The new order had ended in a basement, murdering its own future in a desperate attempt to maintain a facade of ideological purity until the very last second. By the late hours of May 1st, 1945, the secret cohesion of the Führerbunker had completely dissolved, with the bodies of Hitler and the Goebbels family disposed of. The remaining inhabitus generals, secretaries, SS guards, and cooks were no longer bound by a central will. The secret reality of the command center was now a sinking ship. Martin Bormann, the powerful head of the party chancellery, and Arthur Axmann, leader of the Hitler Youth, organized a desperate breakout plan. The objective was to move in small groups, penetrate the Soviet lines to the north and west, and attempt to reach the remnants of the German forces under Admiral Dönitz. This was the moment when the elite of the Reich was forced to trade its bunkers for the sewer pipes and subway tunnels of a dying city. The secret route of the escape was a labyrinth of shadows. Under the cover of darkness, the survivors moved through the tunnels of the Berlin U, specifically the lines near Friedrichstrasse station. The atmosphere was one of pure nightmare. The tunnels were crowded with thousands of terrified civilians, wounded soldiers, and deserters, all sheltering from the artillery fire above. The secret tragedy of this flight was the total lack of coordination. Groups of high-ranking officials found themselves crawling through filth and rubble, often coming face to face with Soviet patrols in the pitch-black tunnels. The Prussian discipline that had conquered Europe had been reduced to a frantic individual struggle for survival in the mud. Among the most controversial secrets of this night was the fate of Martin Bormann. As his group attempted to cross the Weidendammer Bridge under heavy Soviet fire, they were scattered. For decades, rumors persisted that Bormann had escaped to South America, but the secret truth discovered decades later was much simpler. Cornered and seeing no way out, Bormann and the bunker's doctor, Ludwig Stumpfiger, committed suicide near the Lehrtar station. Their bodies were abandoned in the debris of a city they helped destroy. The secret of the breakout was that for the vast majority of the bunker's inhabitants, the escape ended in death or Soviet captivity. The high-ranking officers who had once moved millions of men on maps were now unable to cross a single bridge in their own capital. Meanwhile, back at the Reich, the secret final act was being played out by the remaining holdouts. General Weidling finally surrendered the city of Berlin on the morning of May 2nd. The Soviet soldiers, who had fought their way through the shattered halls of the finally reached the entrance of the Führerbunker. The secret scene that greeted them was a mixture of horror and absurdity. The bodies of the Goebbels children in their beds, the smell of gasoline and decay in the garden, and the dazed, drunken staff who remained behind. The red flag was raised over the Reichstag, and as the dust settled, the secret of the bunker was exposed to the world. The 1,000-year Reich had ended in a 12-meter deep hole, leaving behind nothing but ruins, ghosts, and a legacy of absolute moral and strategic bankruptcy. The fall of the Führerbunker on May 2nd, 1945, did not bring immediate clarity to the world. Instead, it birthed a secret conflict of narratives that would last for decades. As the Soviet Smersh counterintelligence units moved into the smoldering ruins of the Reich Chancellor, they were under strict orders from Joseph Stalin himself: find the body of the beast and keep the findings secret. The secret reality of the Soviet investigation was governed by Stalin's profound paranoia, even after his forensic teams identified Hitler's dental remains through the testimony of the dental assistant. Käthe Häusermann. Stalin publicly maintained that Hitler had escaped perhaps to Spain or Argentina. This was the first great secret of the Cold War: the deliberate weaponization of uncertainty to keep the Western Allies off balance and to justify a continued Soviet military presence in Europe. The secret investigation, conducted by the British intelligence officer Hugh Trevor Roper in late 1945, was a direct response to this Soviet wall of silence. Trevor Roper had to reconstruct the final days by interviewing the survivors, who had trickled into the western zones of occupation secretaries like Trudel Jung and officers like Gerhard Bolt. His findings, eventually published as The Last Days of Hitler, were the first to peel back the concrete layers of the bunker and reveal the theater of delusion we have analyzed. However, even Trevor Roper faced a secret obstacle: the absence of the bodies, because the Soviets had secretly exhumed and eventually incinerated the remains of Hitler and the Goebbels family in 1970. The physical evidence remained a ghost, fueling 1,000 conspiracy theories that haunt the internet to this day. The secret legacy of the bunker is also found in its physical destruction. In the years following the war, the Soviet and later the East German governments attempted to erase the site from history. In 1947, they attempted to blow up the bunker, but the massive concrete walls, designed to withstand Allied blockbusters, barely cracked. It was a secret embarrassment the fortress of the mind refused to be demolished. For decades, the site remained a desolate, unmarked parking lot and a children's playground in East Berlin. The secret was kept so well that many Berliners walked over the final tomb of the Reich every day without knowing what lay 12 meters beneath their feet. Only in the late 20th century was a simple plaque installed, finally marking the spot where the logic of an empire ended in a whimper. The secret lesson of the Führerbunker's final 24 hours is the fragility of human reason when confronted with the cult of personality. The best generals and the most loyal servants allowed themselves to be led into a hole in the ground. Following a man who had long since abandoned reality for a map of ghosts, the bunker was not just a military headquarters. It was a laboratory of the human psyche under extreme pressure. The secret that remains is the warning it offers: that when a nation's leadership retreats into a bunker, be it physical, ideological, or digital land, begins to prioritize its own survival over the truth, the destruction of the city above is inevitable. The files of the bunker are now open, revealing not a glorious final stand, but a desperate, claustrophobic funeral for an idea that was always destined to fail. While the world remembers the names of Rommel and Goebbels, the most influential figure during the final hours inside the Führerbunker was a man who rarely left the shadows: Martin Bormann. As the head of the party chancellery and Hitler's personal secretary, Bormann was the secret architect of the information vacuum that allowed the Führer's delusions to flourish. Bormann understood a fundamental secret of power: he who controls the flow of information controls the man at the top. In the final 24 hours, Bormann acted as a biological firewall, filtering out the desperate reality of the Soviet advance and ensuring that only the most fanatical and optimistic reports reached Hitler's desk. This secret manipulation created a lethal positive feedback loop. When General Weidling or General Krebs tried to present the cold, hard data of the First Belarusian Front's penetration into the Tiergarten, Bormann would often intercept the reports, labeling them as defeatist or exaggerated by combat fatigue. The secret tragedy of the German High Command was that they were communicating with a leader who was essentially a prisoner of his own secretary. Bormann's goal was not to save the Reich. He was too pragmatic for that, but to remain the last man standing in the hierarchy of power, even if that hierarchy was only 10 meters wide. By keeping Hitler in a state of tactical trance, Bormann maintained his own relevance until the final gunshot. The secret friction between Bormann and the military officers like General Wilhelm Keitel and Alfred Jodl, who were at the OKW headquarters outside Berlin, was a war within a war. Bormann used the bunker's limited radio capacity to send secret orders to go-litters across Germany, demanding the execution of anyone who suggested a local surrender. This created a secret state of civil war within the dying Reich. While the soldiers on the front were trying to save their men from Soviet invasion, Bormann's fanatical decrees were forcing teenagers and old men into the path of Stalin's tanks. The secret of the bunker was that the political wing of the Nazi Party was willing to burn down the entire nation just to prove its ideal purity to a man who was already dead in spirit. Furthermore, Bormann's secret obsession with the last will and testament of Adolf Hitler reveals the bureaucratic insanity of the regime's end. Even as the bunker shook from Soviet explosions, Bormann was meticulously typing and witnessing Hitler's final documents, which expelled Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler from the party for treason. The secret absurdity of this moment cannot be overstated. Bormann was preparing a legal framework for a government that would never exist in a city that was already occupied. He was the high priest of a nihilistic ritual, ensuring that the SA legacy remained untainted by the reality of the military collapse. The secret of Bormann's power was his ability to make the trivial seem monumental, while the monumentale end of Germany was treated as a trivial detail. By the time the breakout began on May 1st, Bormann's secret game was over. He had transitioned from the most powerful bureaucrat in Europe to a fugitive in a leather coat, carrying a copy of Hitler's testament like a holy relic. The secret of his disappearance near the Weidendammar Bridge remained the holy grail of Nazi hunters for decades. But the ultimate secret revealed by his fate was the cowardice inherent in the system he built. The man who had ordered millions to stand and die was among the first to flee into the darkness of the Berlin subway, leaving the children of Magda Goebbels and the soldiers of General Weidling to pay the price for his information filter. While history focuses on the maps and the madness, a secret and more visceral war was being fought within the very walls of the Führerbunker, the battle against mechanical failure. By April 28, 1945, the impenetrable fortress had become a technical nightmare. The secret reality of the bunker was that it was never designed for long-term habitation by a full staff under a total siege. The ventilation system, a complex network of filters designed to protect against Allied gas attacks, began to fail as Soviet shells collapsed the intake pipes in the Chancellery Garden. This led to a secret and terrifying rise in carbon dioxide levels, forcing the inhabitants into a state of semi-consciousness, a physiological haze that only deepened the atmosphere of delusion. The secret struggle for water and power was the silent heartbeat of the bunker's final days. The main electrical grid of Berlin had long since been destroyed, leaving the bunker entirely dependent on a massive diesel generator. This machine, located in a cramped, oil-slicked room, became the most important officer in the Reich. If the generator failed, the lights, the air pumps, and the secret radio links to the outside world would vanish instantly. The secret hero, or perhaps the ultimate jailer of the bunker, was Johannes Henschel, the master technician. Henschel remained at his post even after the suicides, keeping the generators running so the field hospital above could have light. The secret irony was that the High Command was preserved in its final hours only by the constant, deafening roar of a machine that consumed the very fuel they lacked for their tanks. As the Soviet forces reached the Wilhelmstrasse, the secret contamination of the bunker's water supply became a crisis. The deep well that served the Chancellery was poisoned by the influx of sewage and debris from the shattered city above. The inhabitants were forced to rely on bottled mineral water and wine, leading to a secret and grotesque scene of decadent dehydration. High-ranking SS officers were drinking rare vintages of French wine, not out of celebration, but because it was safer than the water. This lack of basic hygiene led to a secret outbreak of dysentery and infections among the staff, further eroding the Prussian professionalism that Hitler so desperately tried to maintain. The bunker began to smell of unwashed bodies, diesel exhaust, and the copper tamps of blood from the wounded being treated in the upper levels. The secret failure of the bunker logic was its isolation from the laws of physics. Hitler's architects had built a ceiling that could withstand a 5-ton bomb, but they could not protect the delicate air intake valves from a common Soviet soldier with a grenade. By April 29th, the secret decision was made to turn off the main ventilation and rely on passive air from the stairwells, which brought in the acrid smell of burning Berlin. The invincible Führer was now breathing the smoke of his own burning capital. This technical decay was a mirror of the military collapse, a system so over-engineered and rigid that it could not adapt to a single point of failure. The secret of the bunker's final hours was that it was becoming a biological and mechanical tomb even before the first shots of the suicide were fired. In the final 72 hours inside the Führerbunker, a secret and desperate paper war was being waged. Adolf Hitler and Martin Bormann knew that if the bunker fell, the documents within would become the roadmap for their own prosecution or the ultimate trophy for the Red Army. The secret order was given: burn everything. In the corridors of the lower bunker, secretaries like Trudel Jung and Goethe Christian were no longer typing orders. They were emptying filing cabinets. The secret reality of the Reich's end was a frantic, choking effort to incinerate millions of pages of military reports, personal correspondence, and intelligence files in the small, open-air pits of the Chancellery Garden, often under the direct fire of Soviet snipers. The secret loss of these documents created a strategic void that historians still struggle to fill. Among the papers lost to the flames were the secret transcripts of Hitler's private military conferences from 1945, which contained his most candid admissions of defeat. However, the secret failure of this cleansing was the sheer volume of the bureaucracy. The Nazi machine was so obsessed with record-keeping that it was impossible to destroy it all, while Hitler's personal papers were largely reduced to ash. The secret duplicates and carbon copies held in other bunkers across Berlin survived. The Soviet Smersh units, upon entering the bunker, found not just but a treasure trove of fragmented evidence, half-burnt maps, blood-stained diaries, and the secret financial records of the party chancellery. One of the most valuable secret recoveries was the Hitler-Bormann documents, a series of notes and reflections captured by Bormann during the final months. These files revealed the secret depths of Hitler's bitterness toward his own generals, whom he blamed for the betrayal of the German people. But the secret prize for the Soviets was the dental records and the medical files of the Führer's personal physician, Theodor Moral. These documents provided the secret forensic proof that the man in the bunker was a physical wreck, suffering from advanced Parkinson's disease and a cocktail of drug dependencies. By capturing these files, the Soviets held the secret key to Hitler's physical identity, a key they would hide from the world for decades to maintain the political myth of his escape. The secret fate of the bunker's library and art collection was equally tragic. Inside the deep vaults of the new Reich chancellery, Hitler had stored secret treasures looted from across Europe, intended for his museum in Linz. As the bunker's staff prepared for suicide, Soviet trophy brigades were already mapping out the extraction of these masterpieces. The secret of the bunker was that it was a vault of stolen culture, protected by the same concrete that shielded a mass murderer. The final archive of the bunker was not just a collection of papers, but a mountain of physical evidence of a regime that had built its entire existence on theft, secrecy, and the systematic erasure of its own crimes. The smoke that rose from the Chancellery Garden in May 1945 was the secret funeral of a paper empire. When the steel doors of the Führerbunker were finally breached by the Red Army, a handful of survivors, those who had not followed Hitler into the abyss of suicide, stepped out into a world that no longer recognized them. The secret history of the bunker ghosts, including the secretaries Tradell Jung and Gerda Christian, the adjutant Otto Gunsch, and the telephone operator Rahus Misch, is a study in the psychological preservation of self. For these individuals, the final 24 hours were not a historical event, but a traumatic blur of domesticity and apocalypse. The secret pact that emerged among them was a subtle, unspoken agreement to focus on the ordinariness of Hitler, his kindness to his dog, his vegetarian meals as a psychological shield against the horrific reality of the regime they had served. The secret process of denazification in the Western zones of occupation forced these survivors to testify about the final hours, but the truth was often obscured by the myth of the clean soldier. The German officers who survived the breakout, such as General Hans Krebs, who committed suicide shortly after, or those captured by the Soviets, faced a secret and brutal interrogation process in the Lubyanka prison in Moscow. The Soviets were not interested in historical truth, but in a secret confession that Hitler was a puppet of Western capitalists, or that he had indeed escaped. This created a secret schism in the testimony. Those in the West described a definitive suicide, while those in the East were forced to provide conflicting reports that fueled Stalin's strategic paranoia for decades. The secret life of Tradell Jung, Hitler's youngest secretary, is perhaps the most revealing. For decades, she lived in a state of secret moral amnesia, claiming she was too young and too insulated to understand the crimes of the Reich. It was only in the final years of her life, at the dawn of the 21st century, that the secret weight of her complicity finally broke through. She realized that being in the room where the final orders of a genocide were signed, even as a mere stenographer, made her part of the machinery of death. The secret of the bunker survivors was the banality of their loyalty. They were people who focused on the technical perfection of their typing or the temperature of the soup, while the world outside was being incinerated. This psychology of the bunker extended to the German public. For years, the secret details of the final hours de Champagne, the cyanide, the burning of the Bodisor, treated as a dark fairy tale. The survivors who returned from Soviet captivity in the 1950s brought with them secret, fragmented accounts that slowly coalesced into the downfall narrative we know today. But even the secret of the moral collapse was often omitted. They preferred to talk about the betrayal of Himmler or the madness of Hitler. rather than their own choice to stay in that hole until the very end. The final secret of the survivors is that they remained in a psychological bunker for the rest of their lives, forever trapped in those 12 meters of concrete, unable to truly rejoin a world that had moved on from their failed utopia. The final secret of the Führerbunker is that it did not die with its inhabitants. It became the silent, subterranean ground zero of the Cold War. As the smoke cleared over the ruins of Berlin in May 9, the site became a geopolitical trophy. For the Soviet Union, the bunker was the ultimate proof of their victory over fascism. Yet Stalin's secret decision to obscure the forensic truth of Hitler's death turned the site into a breeding ground for myths. The secret reality of the late 40s was a frantic race by Allied intelligence to map the bunker's layout, fearing that the fortress logic of the Reich would be adopted by the Soviet occupiers. The bunker was no longer just a headquarters. It was a blueprint for the nuclear shelters that would soon proliferate across the globe. The secret physical battle to destroy the bunker in the post-war decades revealed the terrifying resilience of Nazi engineering. In 1947, the Soviet military attempted a massive demolition using tons of high explosives, but the structure's honeycomb design and its 4-meter-thick ferroconcrete ceiling absorbed the blast, merely tilting the upper levels. The East German government GDR lived with the secret embarrassment of a Nazi ghost sitting beneath their administrative center. They eventually covered it with a sterile parking lot and a residential complex in the 1980s, hoping that by burying the concrete, they could bury the uncomfortable memory of German complicity. The secret of the bunker was its refusal to be erased, a physical reminder that the past is never truly buried. The secret of the world's enduring fascination with these final 24 hours lies in the mirror of human nature. We look into the bunker not to see heroes, but to see the ultimate limits of human self. The secret lesson of the downfall is that the more a leadership isolates itself from the street, from the reality of the suffering, it asks the more. It retreats into a fantasy of phantom divisions and wonder weapons. The bunker is the architectural personification of the echo chamber. It remains a secret warning to modern societies that when truth is replaced by ideology and when loyalty is demanded over competence, the result is always a descent into a concrete hole where the only thing left to celebrate is the efficacy of a cyanide capsule. As we close this file on the bunker of delusion, we find that the most profound secret is that the illusions of 1945 were not unique to that time or those people. They are a permanent feature of the human condition under the pressure of total defeat. The Führerbunker today is a silent, flooded tomb of reinforced steel and crushed dreams. But its story continues to serve as a forensic autopsy of a failed civilization. The secret war files remind us that the greatest battles are not fought on maps, but in the minds of those who refuse to see the world as it truly is. The red flag over the Reichstag was the end of the war, but the silence inside the bunker was the final, tragic proof of the cost of pure, unfiltered illusion.